Begin the current Daf Masechtas Eruvin Daf test. We begin on the bottom line of the Chesed base. We will continue our discussion of the previous Daf regarding putting the clay exactly on top of the wall of the mother. Shir's co-sponsor because of Necheskel to anytime Daf. I appreciate everyone joining us today. Today's Daf. Some ideas we're going to be discussing in today's Daf are a clay meshucha. What's if the beam is drawn away from the wall of the mother? Which, as you can see the picture on the right, it doesn't reach all the way on the width of the mother, and how about over here when it's actually a little bit higher and a little bit distant from the mother itself. Then we discussed regarding opinions utilizing the area beneath the crossbeam, and also Bein L'Chayim. We'll see that possibly there are those who will hold that you could use beneath the crossbeam, but it would be a question if you could use the area that's on the side of the side post. Then we'll discuss what's known as, we've mentioned this before, of Nir Mebachutz V'Shaveh Mebefnim. What's if the lechi is seen from the outside, so the people in Rosh Hashanah could see it, but from the people on the inside, it just looks like it's a continuation of the wall. It's equal, it's even from the inside. You don't see it from the inside. And Nir Mebachutz V'Shaveh Mebachutz. What's if you see it from the inside, but from the outside, it just looks like it's an extension from the wall? So what's going to be the halacha in those cases? Some key terms and concepts you can learn about what's called lavid. Lavid is when something is less than 3 or possibly 4, as we'll see in today's daf, of a gap, then we consider it as closed. Chavod Rami comes up in the halachas of sukkah. What comes in today's daf too is that when you, let's say, have a gap in a roof, but there's a plank of wood a little bit higher, we view that as if it's lower down and filling that gap. And what's called matzah minas mina v'neir, which it's interesting, this concept has applications in tarfus and bittul, but it's going to come up in today's daf in the area of a carmelis, which is if the one species is similar to another one, so although it's like fashlufin, it's like sleeping and it's not active, when it finds something from its own group, then it actually gets awakened and then it actually will have that halachic steps. So we begin the current daf from the bottom of Chesed base, where we're continuing from the previous daf we had spoken about, that is actually this case of when there was pegs coming out of the front wall and you put the beam on top of it. There's actually two interpretations. One interpretation said it would depend if you could use the area beneath the clay or not. One said that if you could use the area, means it's the lower end, it's the outer end. That's your decision would actually say then it's going to be invalid because there's a gap. And if you hold that usually it's okay, that you can't use the area beneath it, so then it's the inner gap that's coming down that's connected. That was one interpretation. But then Rava said no. Both of them are going to be invalid, no matter how you hold, because you need what's called be'ina kara gabi mother. You need to have it on top, not on the side. It's got to be on top of the mother. So it's on that interpretation that the Gemara brings the following brisa to ask on Rava. We learned in the brisa that says his karasiv, let's say his crossbeam, as we continue with Testament out, was meshucha, was drawn away. So that sounds like that it's distant from the walls, like tluya or suspended, meaning that the top of the beam is not on the wall itself, rather it's hanging in the airspace because it's far away from, it's too short to hit the two walls of the mavoi. So for example, like our Rashis have the picture, which is really the picture that we have over here. For example, let's say you put a small little thin pole in the middle of the mavoi and you put the crossbeam on top of that. So, regarding these two cases, says the Bryce like this, it depends. If it's pachis megimel, if it's less than 3 tvachim away from the wall, then you don't have to bring another crossbeam. That's what's known as the concept of lavin. As long as it's within 3 tvachim, we consider it as if it's touching. Gimel, but if it's already a distance of 3 tvachim, then you have to bring another crossbeam. It's like it's not touching. As you see this picture, it's not on the mavoi. It's too far away. This is something that many people don't know. There's another opinion that holds pachas meidalin. As long as less than 4 tvachim, ain't tzarich levi karacher. So he holds it's considered loved as long as it's within 4 tvachim. So if it's less than 4 tvachim, you don't have to bring another crossbeam because we view it as if it's touching. But dalit, if it's 4 tvachim, tzarich levi karacher, then you'd have to bring another crossbeam because he holds again in general less than 4 tvachim. You're going to say the concept of loved. Okay, that's the brisa. It says the Gemara, my love. We had two terminologies that we said in this brisa. One was called meshucha, and one was called taluya. What are these two cases that it's not hitting the walls, it's not on the walls of the mavi, that we're saying if it's more than 3 tvachim, it's going to be invalid. My love isn't talking about the meshucha, when we say it's drawn away, it means mibachut, from the outside, meaning to say that it is this case. That it's drawn away into the Rishus Rabbim, like we had asked, when it's on 2 beams, we said, okay, this is meshucha. The problem is that it is on the walls, but it's drawn away. It's towards the outside. That's what meshucha is. And what's Vitluya? Vitluya is mibifnim, is suspended, means in the inside, where it's in the inside, but it's hanging, meaning to say it's not hitting the two walls because it's too short. And then we're going to say lavid to make it that it's longer and that it hits the thing. So you see that one of the cases are that it's going to be valid, this case, because as long as it's within 3 tvachim, we say that's the case of Meshucha, and this is the case of Tluya. So you see that you are going to say that it's going to be valid, even though it's not Kaira al Gaba, as long as it's within 3 tvachim, we will say the concept of Lavid. So the Gemara says, no, it's not a difficulty on Rabbah. The 2 cases that we discussed, of Meshucha and Tluya, are both on the inside. They're in the inner part of the Mavli. And both of them are talking about that they're too short. So then why do you need 2 cases for? Just say one. Now, Meshucha is Meruch Achas. When it says it's that it's drawn away, it means from one side, meaning one pole is on the top of the wall, but the other part of the beam is not hitting the opposite wall. The Tluya, when we're saying suspended, that's Mishtei Ruchis, it's this picture. This is Tluya. Meshucha would be that this part is actually on the wall, but it's just not hitting in the other side. And Tluya is that's not hitting it on both sides. And says and therefore it's not difficult on Rava because none of the cases are permitting when it's in front, because it can't be in front, it's got to be at least on top. You want to say it's not hitting it all the way, okay, then we can say love it, but it's got to be at least on the top, it can't be in front. And says the Gemara explains why you needed both cases. What would you say Meruch Achas Amin love it? Then only from one side you'd say love it, but Mishtei Ruchas Le'amin love it, but you wouldn't say love it on 2 sides. Kamash Malan, that's what you need to say not only in the case of Meshucha, but also Tluya, to say that even if it's totally suspended, it's not even just drawn away from one wall, it's still going to be valid. You'll say 2 lovets on either side. That's one interpretation. Rav Ashi, he says, no, to tell you 2 sides you don't need to say, because once you already said Meshucha, which is from one side, we would know that you could say love it on the other side too. Rather, he's saying actually it's one case. Meshucha v'hi Tluya. It's saying that it's drawn away and it's suspended, meaning to say it has 2 flaws. It's too short from hitting the walls. Also, it's suspended above the height of the wall of the mother. The Echidami has this case, Tomad, just the picture on here on the left. It's talking about when you stuck into the wall 2 diagonal pegs. On the 2 walls of the mother. And their bend are facing one to the other, as some Rashis have this picture, that it extends the crossbeam from the 2 sides that you could put on, because again the crossbeam is too short, and what they did is that they had these poles that were holding it up. I guess they was easier for them to hold it up on this angle, but they themselves, Rashi explains why can't you say this is part of the kaira, is because they don't have a width of a tefach, and the halacha of the validity of a kaira is brought in the Mishnah that later on the Daf Yomi base has to be a thickness of a tefach, so this cannot be part of the kaira. This is the kaira itself, and that's what we're talking about. This is the case of Tluya, meaning it's one case. It's Meshucha Shi Tluya. And what we're saying is She'im B'Goivan, that you don't have in the height of these pegs above the walls Gimel of 3 tvachim, because if you have higher than the height of 3 tvachim, it would become invalid because the kaira has to be on top of the walls. But now that you see less than 3 tvachim, you see the concept of what's called Chaved Rami. Chaved means to say lower down. You view it as if it's on the wall itself. So it's not. It's less than 3 tvachim in height. And the Einbein Akrim Musen Gimel. And also where it bends, you don't have, meaning in the width, you don't have more than 3 tvachim. So you can see loved from the ends of the beam to the wall itself. That's the chiddush. It's one case. This of Meshucha and Tluya is one case. Meshucha v'hi Tluya. It's drawn away from here less than 3 tvachim. It's also less than 3 tvachim in the height. What would you say? So what's the chiddush? Because what would you say? Oy loved. And that maybe you're only going to say loved, which is a terminology of extending something. Or you're only going to say that you lower it down, but love it v'chavit lo yamrina. You're not going to say both concepts of extending in the width and also lowering it down from the height. That's what you needed the chiddush of this halacha to say that no, you'll say both concepts. But again, it's not difficult on Rava because there's no one saying anything about this case that when it's meshucha mibachutz that it's going to be valid. Rava says no, it's never going to be valid. It has to be inside the mother, which is al gabi mother. If it doesn't hit the wall, that's okay. We could still view it as extending. But extending is not going to be from the outside, only has to be on the outside, on the inside. And you could say Chaved Rami, you could say Loved. Those are 2 different interpretations. Either Tluya is the second case of it's on both sides, or it's actually one case of Meshucha v'hi Tluya, which is both in the width and in the height. But again, it's got to be on top of the Mavi itself. And therefore it's not difficult on Rava that we had from the previous stop. Now we can.
Sukkah, I think you don't say it's a column, two halacha mashmasinas next to each other. If you have
right, you brought this up once in the previous year. I remember something like that also, some type of kasha we got involved. So continuing from the previous daf, the Gemara brings the concept of Tani Reb Zakkai Kamid Reb Yechanan. Reb Zakkai taught a brisa in front of Reb Yechanan, and he said this following brisa. He says, Bein l'chayayim. He says, this halacha between the lechi and betachas hakara and beneath the crossbeam, that nidin kekarmelis. That's qualified like a carmelis, and it's going to be usher to carry over here. A carmelis is a rabbinically forbidden area, which is essentially what a mavai is when it's not fixed. So he's saying that this area is not considered part of the permitted part of the mavai through the lech and the kaira, and you cannot carry by that area. So that Amalei, so Rabbi Yechanan said to him, go out, Tani Lavar. Go teach this outside. It's not an accurate brisa. That was what Rabbi Yechanan responded to what the brisa was being taught, which the brisa was saying you cannot carry. Rabbi Yechanan saying it's not accurate. Now, the Gemara has a machlekes regarding what did he mean when he said it's not accurate. Did he mean on everything? Did he mean only part of it? Amar Baya said, Mistabrim, so Rabbi Yechanan, it's logical to say that this teaching Rabbi Yechanan, that he says, Puk Tani Labar, teach it outside, it's not forbidden. Rather, it's going to be mutter, that was only Tachas HaKayr, that was only going on the case of beneath the crossbeam. And the reason for that is because he holds Chude HaChitzin Yared V'Saisim, that the outermost part of the crossbeam is what comes and closes down, and therefore you could carry beneath the crossbeam because the virtual wall is on the outer part of the Kayr. It says Abaye, but regarding if it's between the area of the side post, again, there's a difference between a lechi and a kaira, that there, if you don't have a kaira and it's only with a lechi, that Rabbi Yechanan would agree that us is going to be forbidden. Like we said in the previous daf, that we had the teaching of Chizah, says everyone agrees that bein lechayim is going to be us, like we said from Taisus, because since the lechi is very thin, you might very well easily come to carry in the Rishus Harabim. So it says Abaye, no, when Rabbi Yechanan is saying that it's going to be okay, it's only tachas the kaira, not by the lechi. But Rava, he disagrees. He says, no, he was saying it's okay beneath the crossbeam and between the lechi. And Amar Ravi says, he says, and where do I know this from? Because there's a teaching of Rabbi Yechanan that says as follows. Regarding an area that doesn't have 4 tefachim square, that's in the Rishus Harabim, right between the Rishus Harabim and the Rishus Hayachid. So since it's not a distinct area, meaning it's less than 4 by 4, so it's not considered its own domain, and it's considered nullified to the areas on the side of it. And that's what's known in Halacha as Makom Tur. There's 4 primary domains we talk about in Shabbos: Rishus Harabim, Rishus Hayachid, Carmelis, and a Makom Tur. So when you don't even have 4 by 4, that's considered as a Makom Tur. So on that, Rabbi Yechanan says an area that's not 4 by 4, Mut lebnei Rishus Harabim or lebnei Rishus Hayachid lekatav. It's permitted for people in the public domain or in the private domain that's right on the side of that Makom Tur. Like imagine something like a mailbox, let's say, something that's not like 4 by 4. And there's a lot of shoulder their loads on it. You're allowed to carry from Rishus Hayachid onto that area, no matter if you're Rishus Hayachid or Rishus Harabim, for as long as you don't use it as an exchange post, where people, because you're going to say, oh, Rishus Hayachid, I can put my load on. People from Rishus Harabim can take from it. No, that people shouldn't say, oh, you carry from Rishus Harabim to Rishus Hayachid, and they're going to come to permit right out a Haitzah on Shabbos. But one thing is that we see is that what Rav is proving from this halacha of Rabbi Yechanan is that between the lechi also is considered its own. It's even if you're going to consider it its own area, but since it's less than daled by daled, it's going to be bottled to the areas on either side. So therefore, that's going to be a permitted area to carry because it's bottled, meaning it's not. It's a permitted area. It's like a makom tur essentially. Just like a makom tur, you could carry over there, and you can carry from Rishus Harabim into Rishus Hayachid. So the Mefarshim explain here the way Rashi explains it sounds like, oh, you can carry here to Rishus Harabim, but be that as it may, it's considered a makom tur, and therefore you're allowed to carry over. It's not considered as a carmelis. Which Abai would respond and says, no. Hasam over there by makom tur is begavaya gimel. We're talking about that it has a height of 3 tvachim, so it's recognizable, and therefore there's no reason to make it the gezerah and make it sound like oh, it looks like you're doing haitzah. But by the area of between the lechi, which is not so recognizable, its area. And if you're going to permit carrying over there, you might come to confuse, and you might come to carry into Rishus Harabim. And therefore, it makes sense the way Abai is saying, is that no, this area would not be able to be carried, even according to Rabbi Yechanan, and it's not similar to the case of Makom Tur, because the Makom Tur is an elevated area, let's say right outside the Rishus Hayachid, between that and Rishus Harabim, and it's higher than 3 tvachim, and you could see it, and so you understand it's a Makom Tur, and therefore we're not concerned. But here, you can't really tell the difference between this inch and this inch of Rishus Harabim and of the Maboi, and therefore it would be forbidden according to Rabbi Yechanan. So that was Rabbi trying to prove his point. Amar Abaye says, and how do I know that Rabbi Yechanan would say it is forbidden by the lechi. He says, Teicha Pesach, the area inside the Pesach, like a mother, which if it has blocks that are taking up the width of the entryway on either side, and those are, so to speak, the lechis of the mother. Tzarich lechi acher. You need to have another lechi on the outside, latiroi, to permit, if you want to use the area between these two different being, like there's two different parts that are jutting out, meaning which are essentially ben l'chayayim. So essentially, this is not here, but let's say this was the part of the construction. The wall comes out a little bit here, where you see this lechi, and it comes out a little bit over here. So these are called Teicha Pesach. So on that, the teaching was said in the name of Rav, that this Teicha Pesach, sometimes you have like a wall comes out, a little entryway into the Mavai, that's not really a lechi. So that area in the middle of the Pesach, meaning in the entryway, that needs another lechi to permit it. Now, so you see clearly that the area of Teich Bein L'Chayayim is not a permitted area. You would have to make another lechi outside of that if you wanted to carry in that area by the entryway. Because obviously, you see, like what I'm saying, that, and no one disagrees with this teaching of Rav, even Rabbi Yochanan, that Bein L'Chayayim is going to be asur. And that's as Abaye B'chitim that you're going to say, the Isbei Dalal Al Dalad. Oh, maybe that case is talking about that here the entryway is a big fat entryway, nice big house, or gateway into the Mavoi, and therefore it's along the length of a Mavoi in the area of 4x4, which that's considered its own distinct area, and therefore yes, that would be considered as a karmelis and would be rabbinically forbidden, and therefore it's not a raya, but maybe by a lechi, which is very thin, it's not its own distinct area, maybe then you would be able to carry by the lechi, it would not be its own area, and that says Abaye, you can't say that. Because Rav Chanabad Rav Amarav, he says Teicha Pesach, this regarding the space of the entryway itself. Even though it's not an area 4x4, it's tzorch lechi achalatir, you need another lechi to be permitted. So you see clearly that what's called bein achlayayim by the area of the lechi itself is not considered part of the permitted part of the mavai, and therefore don't disagree with me. Obviously it's forbidden, not like you're saying that it's going to be permitted. Which Rava, he says no. Hasam over there is the besuch l'karmas. There it's open to what is the mother open to over there in that case? That Teicha Pesach, you need another lechem to be permitted, you cannot carry Bein L'Chayayim. It's open to an open field, which is a karmas, or rabbinically forbidden area, which is similar to the Teicha Pesach. And therefore it's going to combine with something similar to it, that's on the outside, and therefore it's going to make it forbidden. Which the Gemara asks on Rav, I said, wait a second. What are you telling me? You're telling me, but if let's say opens to Rosh Hashanah, then you can tell me Shari it's permitted. Why are you saying it's permitted? Because Teicha Pesach Bein L'Chayayim, you really say is a permitted area. It's considered as part of the mother. That's how you hold in Rabbi Yochanan, that's Rabbi's opinion. He holds that would be okay. When Rabbi Yochanan says Puk, Tani Levara says no, you're allowed to carry beneath the Kara and on the side of the Lechi. And what's the case that you tell me you cannot use Teicha Pesach? Is when it opens up at their Carmelis. Why their Carmelis? Because the Carmelis is very similar to a mother. Karmelis is a rabbinically forbidden area. Mob is also a rabbinically forbidden area. So that's when it's going to be forbidden to carry Teicha Pesach. Because then it's very similar to the Karmelis that's on the outside, and it's like, so to speak, bottled to that. But what? If it's open to Rosh Hashanah, then you tell me, that would be okay. Because not similar to Rosh Hashanah. Rosh Hashanah is biblically prohibited area. And the Mavai, the Teicha Pesach, is considered a Karmelis. So he says interesting terminology. He says, Yitziva Ba'ara. The citizen is on the ground, meaning he's thrown down to the ground. The Giyarvish Meshmaya and the non-resident is in the heavens. He's on top of the world. How's it possible that if it's open to a Carmelis, the Teicha Pesach is going to be worse than when it's opened up to Rosh Hashanah? When it's open to Rosh Hashanah, you say it's okay, you can carry Teicha Pesach. But it opens up into a Carmelis, then it's going to be worse. He says, and this is interesting halachic terminology over here. Matzah min, the species which is between the lechi, that area is a karmelis. But it didn't have the shiur of a karmelis. A karmelis and a makam Torah are very similar, if you recall from Masechet Shabbos. The only difference is a karmelis is longer, has the area of a square like it has by Rosh Hashanah. Makam Torah is just smaller, so therefore it's exempted area. But essentially, in its intrinsic characteristic, it's a rabbinically forbidden area, it's just not forbidden because it's too small. So this species of a karmelis type finds esminoi, its own type, which is on the outside of it, which is an actual karmelis, the neir, and it strengthens it by finding its own group, and it wakens it up from its sleep, which it had originally been bottled when it was next to something that was not its min, which was the mother. Like in other words, so let's say you're from whatever Lakeland, you go somewhere to Europe, or you're in Cuba, whatever it is. You feel out of place and you're a little bit like silent. Suddenly you find one of your chavim go, hey, what's going on? Suddenly you become a little bit more awakened because you find your own type. So that's like the muscle that we say over here with the Carmelists, with Bai Lechi. This is really an area of a Carmelist, but it's too insignificant, so it's like a makab. So therefore, we're saying it's batal lakan. It's gonna be batal to the mother, and you could carry in the mother. But when it's open, and when it's open to the Rosh Hashanah, it would be the same thing. But when it's open to the Carmelists, it's really very similar to a Carmelist. And that Carmelist rabbinic, that has the shiur of a Carmelist. So that's rabbinically forbidden area. Then says Rabbi, yes, then it's going to be forbidden to carry bein al chayayim because it's batal to the area now of the Carmelists. And outside of it, it's going to be worse, than when it's over to Rosh Hashanah. Now the Gemara continues, however, and wants to ask on Rabbi's opinion. Amalei Rav Huna bereid Rabbi Shua Rav. He asks as follows: Adlai Tisber, do you really not hold, like Abaya wants to tell you, the bein l'chayayin, that the area between the lechi, according to Rabbi Yechanan, that aser it is going to be aser? You're trying to say, according to Rabbi Yechanan, that it's permitted in the area between the lechi. Is it not forbidden? But this is Rabbi Yechanan's own teaching. He says the following interesting case: Mavai, an alleyway, shirat safai, that you made consecutive b'lechayayin with side posts along the length of the mavi, starting from the front of the mavi, going towards the back, but only for an area of 2-3 amas. And they're pachas meidalid, and they're less than area of 4 tefachim, meaning between each lechi, you don't have 4 tefachim, but you do have between them 3 tefachim. So again, 2 things. One was saying that it's along the length of the mavi, and it's less than 4 tefachim between each one. So that says Rabbi Yechanan. We come to the machlekes of Shimon and Rabbanan, which we had on the top of this amud, that when there's a gap between 3 and 4 tefachim, do we say love it or not? Rabbi Shimon says as long as less than 4 tefachim, you're still going to say love it. Now from that machlekes we're going to learn that also regarding validating this exact mavai, that there is a machlekes between them, but Rabbi Yechanan didn't explain what he was saying, that according to that machlekes, you'll have the machlekes in this case. Now Rav Huna ben Yeshua is coming to say that obviously this Rabbi Yechanan said that you have an application of the machlekes of Shimon in and Rabban in this case. You're only going to have regarding the halachic concept if you could use the area keneged al chayayim opposite the area of the lechi itself. Why? As the Gemara explains, the according to Shimon that he says, I'm in love that we say love it up until 4 tefachim. So this would say love it that these are all considered connected. So mishtamash ad chudei hapanimi. So you could only use, as this picture shows, up until the inner part shalech hapanimi of the innermost lechi along the length of the mavli. Because according to Shimon, they're all considered as one lechi through love it, because they're less than 4 tefachim gaps. We view them as if they're closed, and you're not allowed to use by a mavli only until the innermost part of the innermost lechi. But from there on out, it's considered bein ha'lechiyam. It's opposite the lechi itself. It's going to be forbidden. Whereas the Rabban, that they say that when it's 4 tefachim gap, when it's more than 3 tefachim, even though it's not 4 tefachim yet, lo yamina loved, we don't say loved. So according to Rabban, this is not considered as one lechi, because more than 3 tefachim between the gaps. So it's the outermost lechi that is what's really permitting the mavoi. So therefore, mishtamash ad chudei hapanim yishalchitzin. You could use up until the innermost part of the outer lechi, and you could use the rest of the mavi up until the innermost part of the outermost lechi, because it's only opposite this one itself that's considered bein al chayayim, opposite the lechi itself, because this is the lechi. These are not the lechis. This is the lechi, because this is not considered connected as one. So it says, and that says Rav Huna, al bein l'chayayim, but between the lechi, we see the kulam according to everyone, and Rabbanan, that's us. It's going to be forbidden. So we see that Rabbi Yechanan hold bein l'chayayim is going to be usher, because if you would think to say that bein l'chayayim according to Rabbi Yechanan is going to be mutter, so where do you have an application of machlekes and Rabbanan over here? Who cares if it's one lechi or if it's all different lechis? Doesn't make a difference. You're allowed to use bein l'chayayim. So where would you have a machlekes and Rabbanan? Obviously, you're incorrect. And obviously, bein l'chayayim according to Rabbi Yechanan, like Abaya says, is going to be usher. And then we have machlekes. Okay, which is the lechi? This or all of them? That Shimon would hold it's all one, and then we could only use up until here. Rabban would say it's all different, and then we could use up until here. Which Ravam.
You don't need kavanah to have lechi, to have lechi to say love. You can't say I don't want to say love. I don't want to apply love.
Right. Yeah, good question. It sounds like that it would always be, and we view it as if it's connected, at least l'chumrah. So the Gemara says, V'rava, So the Gemara gives two approaches to reject the difficulty on Rava. First, Rava gives his approach that he gave for the previous question, and then we'll bring another answer why it's not difficult on Rava. Rava, he says, no. Hasanami, there that case also is the Besuach L'Karmelis. You're right. Here it's going to be us, so you're right. So it's going to be forbidden Ben L'Chayim, and therefore you're going to have Machlishim L'Rabbanan. What's considered Ben L'Chayim? But what do you mean Ben L'Chayim? You said is mutter. Yeah, but there Ben L'Chayim is going to be us, or why? Because the Besuach L'Karmelis. Here, you know what's opening up to? Not just Rab, it's opening up to a Karmelis. Opening to a Karmelis, it's Motzim Minas Mina, V'neir. Then Ben L'Chayim is going to be usher, because this is really like a Karmelis. It's just a permitted because it's Batal L'Kan is less than 4, but when it's open to a Karmelis, then it's going to find what it's similar to, and therefore it's going to be reawaken its Karmelis status, and therefore it's going to be forbidden, just like the Karmelis on the outside. But then the Gemara says, why? Same question asked before, but if it's open to what are you going to say? Sure, it's going to be permitted? What, what, the resident is down on the floor, and the non-resident, he's up in the sky, he controls everything, he's better? So and yes, that's the concept of you find the same type, it's going to reawaken its prohibited status. Now, continue to Beis, where Rav Ashima gives a second approach. He says the truth is that Bein L'Chayam according to Rabbi Yochanan is like Rava, that it is permitted. So how is Rabbi Yochanan saying that you can have an application of the Machlekes between Blue and Rabban here in this case? Is Kegoin, so he says we're talking about Shirit Safei B'L'Chayim, where you're doing consecutive side posts, Pachas Marba, like we said, there's less than 4 tefachim between each pole, but it's B'meshech Arba Amas. He adds on one more variable that we didn't know up until now into the case. It's along the length of the wall of the Mavai, not 2-3 amas, but 4 amas. Oh, that's a significant factor. And now we understand the Machlekes on Rabbanan, even if we hold Ben L'Chayim is going to be mutter. Why? That he says we say love it as long as it's less than 4 tefachim. So therefore, according to him, like we said, it's going to be considered as 1 lechi. Now the Gemara previously in Daf Yomi had told us that when you have a lechi of 4 amas, that's not a lechi anymore. That's already like a mavoi. A mavoi could be 4 amas. It loses its status as a lechi when it's 4 amas. Havali mavoi. If this is 4 amas, this is not a lechi anymore, and it's 1 lechi because it's already shared dal amas. You can't have a lechi so big. A lechi can't be 4 amas because then it's like a mavoi. No, this is a lechi. The whole wall is a lechi. That's a mavoi already. So that's why it's invalid. It's lechi achalatir. That you need to have another lechi to permit it. This quote unquote mavoi that's between L'Chaim and Rashi has 2 different interpretations. If that's the whole mavoi or that's only the area opposite that too big of a mavoi. But one thing is that according to Rabbi Yochanan, it's not permitted. But Rabbanan the Amri learning love it. But according to Rabbanan that they don't say love it when it's more than 3 tefachim. So each and every one of them is considered its own independent lechi. Oh, so then the mother is being permitted by the first lechi. So leitzarch lechi achalatir. You don't need to have another lechi to be permitted, and therefore it's not difficult on Rava because it's not because of the halacha ben l'chayim. No, ben l'chayim is mutter. But the question is, do we view them all as 1 lechi along the length of 4 amas? If it's 4 amas, that's why according to Rabbi you're not going to be able to use it because it's like a mavoi and it's not like a lechi. No, it's not like a mavoi. They're all independent, and therefore you could use the area, even ben l'chayim, and it's not difficult on Rava. But then the Gemara asks, once it introduced this machlekes of Shmuel and Rabbanan, the Gemara has a different question on Shmuel. Well, Rabbi Shimon Gamliel, although you're right, okay, we're viewing this as all as one mavi the way Rav Ashi is explaining. And you're right, so therefore you shouldn't be able to use this mavi, or at least opposite this area, 2 interpretations of Rashi, because it's considered like a mavi. Even so, how could Rabbi Yochanan have understood from Shimon Gamliel that you would need to have another lechi to permit it? What do you mean this mavi should be permitted? Why? This should be considered as visible from the outside, but equal from the inside. Which, the way Rashi explained, Taisa says a little different, is that generally we could presume that when they would make this first lechi, the outermost, they would actually draw it a little bit towards the outside. Because that was the way that if you would make a lechi, you would do it, as our Rashis have a picture that shows this idea, so that it should be seen from the inside and from the outside. That it was put over there for the purpose of being a lechi. Because if you don't pull it out a little bit towards the width of the lechi out of the wall a little bit towards the Rosh Hashanah, but rather equal as the next picture Rashi shows, which is equal to the outer wall from those on the. So it just looks like you're adding to the thickness of the wall of the mavoi, and it's not recognizable from the people on the outside that it's a lechi. Only on the inside do you see that it's not from the wall because the outermost you see from the inside that it's sticking out. But you wouldn't see from the outside because it looks like it's just a thicker part of the wall. Now, therefore, since the first lechi, the way Rashi explained it, sticks out a little bit towards the outside, so then when you go ahead and you make all these different side posts side by side, and now, yes, since according to Rabbi Shloimy Schwartzberg, it's within 4 tzvachim each one, and therefore it's not like a lech anymore, it's considered like a wall, but still the mavi should be permitted by that first little indent, that little thing that sticks out that you see from the outside, because since you see from the outside sticking out, the Gemara tells us later on that that the halacha is that if it's visible, the mavi, the lechi from the outside, although from the inside it looks equal, it's still going to be qualified as a lechi. Like in regards to a regular lechi, and we'll have these complicated cases very shortly. But here, as long as from the outside you do see it, so even though in the inside, quote unquote, it can't be a lechi, on the inside it's like in the category of shavim bifnim, but still, since it's seen from the outside, and it's going to work as a hacker for that on the outside. So then even though from the inside it's like a wall, it should still be valid, because you see from the outside. And that says the Gemara, midu taima, is this a reason? In other words, the question that you're asking, that even according to Shemim Lil, it should be validated because nirba mechutz, that's El Rabbi Yechon asking the question. That he's learning out that from the Loved of Rabbi Shimon, that since it's less than 4 tefachim, he's going to say that this mavi is going to be invalid because it's not considered as a lech anymore. So that's who you're asking the question on. But Hakiyasar Rabbi Nam Rabbi Yechon, when Rabbi came, he said Nim Rabbi Yechon that he actually holds near the machutz b'shavim b'fnim. If you see from the outside, but from the inside you don't see the lechi, Eino Nida Mishum Lechi does not get qualified as a lechi. In other words, it's not going to be validated from the outside. It's got to be validated from the inside itself too. So therefore, if you're going to say love, according to Rabbi Shimon, so therefore it's going to be considered as a wall, not as a lechi, and therefore you would need another lechi to permit it, and therefore it's not difficult why he's explaining in this opinion of Shimon Gamliel that it actually would be invalid, and it's not going to be validated from the halachic council of nir b'chutz, even though it's shavim b'fnim. Now, that actually brings us now to this whole discussion now of what we just brought up, which we had asked a question on Rav Ashi. Now we bring this as a discussion in its own right. Itma we learned. Nir b'fnim b'shavim b'chutz. If let's say it's a little bit complicated, you're going to need the pictures. There's pictures in Rashi and there's pictures that we have over here, but it might be necessary because it gets a little bit complicated. If let's say you see the lechi from the inside, but it's equal, it's even on the outside. In other words, you made the lechi on the width, along the length of the mavli, and you didn't pull it out, as Rashi had previously explained, a little bit towards the outside. Rather, you made it equal to the outer wall of the thickness of the wall of the mavli. So it looks like that you're just adding on to the thickness of the wall, and it's called Eina Nir B'Machutz. On the outside, it doesn't look like Elechi, because it just looks like an extension of the outer wall. But the inner part of that, which it sticks out into the thickness of the mavli, you see over here that this is something different than the wall. So you see the lechi, but from here, if you're looking just outside, you just see those horizontal walls, the latitudinal. You just see latitudinal walls. You don't see anything. You don't see a lechi necessarily when you're looking over here. You can't tell that there's an indentation over here. So it's nir b'chutz. It's nir b'fnim b'shavim b'chutz. So that everyone agrees nidim b'shum lechi. This would be qualified as lechi. It's okay as long as the people on the inside notice it. It's okay. But let's say nir b'chutz b'shavim b'fnim. Let's say you could see that it's a lechi from the outside, but from the inside it looks even to the wall. In other words, where the whole lechi is on the outside, and the inner part that's indented is on the thickness of the wall of the mavli. You don't see that from the inside. And again, there's many different interpretations how to explain these exact cases. But it looks like it's just like you're adding onto the length of the wall. But on the outside, you can tell that's not from the wall of the mavli, because again, the pictures that we have in our Rashi are the more preferred pictures, are the ones on the left side, on the margin of the Gemara, where it shows it a little bit different. There's different interpretations of what exactly it is. But whichever picture you want to pick, according to whichever interpretation, the point is like this picture over here, you see on the outside the lechi, but you don't see it from the inside. From the inside, just looks like it's extending further the wall. On the outside, you can tell that this is something different than the wall itself. So then we have a machlekes between Reb Chia, Reb Shimon, and Reb Chanama. One says nidim mishum lechi, as long as you can see from the outside, it will be qualified as a lechi. Chanama ain't nidim mishum lechi. The other one says no, it's not going to be qualified as a lechi because the people on the inside can't tell that it's a lechi. They can't tell that this is where the mavli ends. So therefore, it's not going to be valid that from the outside they could see it. So it says the Gemara, it's time Reb Chia do Amma. We could prove that Reb Chia, he's the one that said, because it didn't say who has said which opinion. We could prove that he holds nidim mishum lechi, that it is qualified as a lechi from the fact that you can see it on the outside. Why? Because the Tan Reb Chia taught the following advice. He said, "Kaisel a wall should see the echad kanis michaver." He's going to describe a case of a lechi that's from the construction itself. You have one of the walls that's indented more than the other parts of the wall. Meaning that the building, the structure itself goes in, and there's a diminishment of its thickness. Now that means to say, if some part is being indented, I don't know what the antonym of that is, or whatever the inverse of that is. There's something that's outdented. Whatever, there's a dent. There's something that's sticking out, which is coming out like almost like a pillar. So on that says Reb Chia, this Bryce says now bein shenir mebachutz b'shavim mebifnim, whether you see it on the outside but you don't see it from the inside. For example, if let's say this indentation of the wall is happening in the front, which that's not something that you see from those on the inside. Rather, only the people from the Shusram see it. Which, if you see on your Gemara, you might have that I have a dalet on the side of my Gemara on the margin. That's like where you see it. And actually, some have the interpretation that actually that little line is actually the way we have in our picture on picture bays. But be that as it may, if you're facing the Mavoi, you see the wall indented, but those in the Mavoi don't see it necessarily indented. They don't notice that from the inside. Or bein shenir mebachutz b'shavim mebifnim, or the other way around. Let's say it's visible from the it's visible, or bein shenir mebifnim b'shavim mebachutz. Or it's visible from the inside, but not from the outside, which in our pictures is picture number Gimel. And this discussion why Rashi says a different case than he said before. I'm not going to complicate it more than what's necessary, but the point is that the indentation is from the back of the wall. So you see the indentation from the inside. But essentially, it's not really the same as this, because this is a lechi. But imagine if the construction of the wall was like this. So we're talking about the wall is indented. The question is, where is it indented? So if the indentation is on the outer part of the wall, let's say on the front of the wall, and it gets indented over there, so then that carved out part, you only see from the outside, you don't see from the inside. But if the indentation is actually, let's say you have a very thick wall, and then let's say a few amas in, you indented behind that, so that's only near b'bifnim, but it's shavim mebachutz, and the outside is just like a thick wall. You don't see that it gets indented. So on either one of those cases, Reb Chia taught a brayso, nidan mishum lechi, it's going to be qualified as a lechi. It's a stein. Obviously, you just proved the point that obviously holds either one is going to be okay. That Reb Chia is going to be the one who holds that even near b'bachutz v'shavim mebifnim or near b'bifnim v'shavim mebachutz are both going to be good, because he says it doesn't make a difference where it gets indented. It doesn't make a difference which one's going to be the nearer. And those are the case of either near b'bachutz or near b'bifnim. And Reb Chia taught that brayso that's going to be okay. So on that says the Gemara, wait a second. But for Rabbi Yechanan, who we clearly had mentioned before, that he says that when it's this case of nir b'bachutz b'shavim b'bifnim, he said it's not qualified as a lechi. Milei shmilei ha. You think he didn't hear this brayso? Rabbi Chia taught that it is judged as a lechi. Ela shmilei. Obviously, Rabbi Yechanan heard this. Well, he doesn't hold of it. So if that's the case, so the Gemara says, so how are you going to prove from this brayso Rabbi Chia brought that obviously he holds that it's qualified as a lechi, but maybe he himself, Rabbi Chia Nami, maybe he heard the brayso as he taught it, but maybe he doesn't hold of it. Rabbi Yechanan also doesn't hold of it, even though there's a brayso. So maybe Rabbi Chia himself doesn't hold of it. The Gemara says, no, how are you saying this? Bishlam Rabbi Yechanan doesn't hold of the brayso, he didn't teach the brayso. Rabbi Chia, if he wouldn't hold this brayso, why would he teach it? Obviously, the fact that he taught it, he holds of it, which Tais actually points out. Although elsewhere in Shas, like in Nidid, we find someone teaching a brayso that doesn't hold of, that's only, let's say, Rishonim, earlier generations. You would still teach the brayso, but your colleagues, you wouldn't teach the brayso if you disagreed with it. And this Rabbi Chia himself was the one who taught the braysos, and he wouldn't teach it if he disagreed with it. Obviously, is that he holds it. Now, continuing on this halacha, Amar Rabbi Baravuna, he says that nir mibachutz v'shavim mibifnim, this halacha of if you see it from the outside, but it's flush from the inside, you don't see from the inside, that nidan mishum lechi, he says it is going to be qualified as a lechi. In other words, he holds like Reb Chia. So on that, Amar Rabba, so Rabba had taught that halacha, but he says we asked on our teaching from a Mishnah later on that's at the Beis Hamikdash, which we already referenced in the previous stuff. The Mishnah talks about chatzar ketana. Here we have the picture. Chatzar ketana shenifetz l'gedalim. If you have a smaller courtyard that's totally breached to a larger courtyard, so the halach is like this: gedalim muteres, the larger courtyard is going to be permitted because it's essentially covered on all four. It's closed on all four sides because this is closed on three sides, and then even the fourth side is considered a pesach because, as we'll explain, there's less than 10 amas over here, and therefore a pesach is valid less than 10 amas, and there are walls. So it's a pesach, it's not totally breached. But for Gitana Asur, the small one's going to be forbidden. You know why? It's like the opening of the big one. It is totally breached. It doesn't have a fourth wall at all. It doesn't have a fourth wall, so it's totally breached. So therefore it's not going to be a permitted area to carry. It's totally breached to the Gedalim, meaning it's open to an area that didn't make an area with it. Here you don't have to make an Erev. It's like we have a doorway. The doorway is okay. It makes it still as a separate area. But for them, it's going to be forbidden. Now on that, asks Rabbah on our teaching, Ve'im Isa. Now if it's true, the way we're saying that Nir Mebachutz is going to permit, even though it's Shavim Mebifnim, so Ketan and Amitishri, so that the smaller one should be permitted. You know why? Because Nir Mebachutz, Shavim Mebifnim. This is something, the Pesach is visible with the side posts from the outside, not from the inside. But if it works on the outside, it should work for the inside too, because you say Nir Mebachutz v'Shavim Mebifnim works. So why is this not the Pesach being Nir Mebachutz, but Shavim Mebifnim? So on that, Rabbi Zeri says, no, it's not difficult. Because we're talking about Benechnas and Kaisli Gitana. We're talking about where the walls of the smaller one, here the picture is very precise, the walls of the smaller one are sticking out and going into Ligedoila, into the larger courtyard, for an area of, let's say, 2 or 3 amas. Oh, so now, those walls that are sticking out from the larger courtyard, that are behind where the smaller one is breached, obviously you see that they're not part of the smaller courtyard. As our Rashi has the picture, as we put the picture over here, that you can't say that it's the Pesach of this. It's not the Pesach is when the walls end. And the fact that these walls go in, that's what. But you're right, if these walls would not stick out, you would say Nir Mebachutz B'Shavim Mebifnim, that it would be valid. That Mishnah that says it's not valid is because the walls of the Ketana are sticking out. These are obviously then not their walls. But then says the Gemara, but for Lema Lovid. Why did you say Lovid? But Tishrin, this should be permitted. As there's another picture in our Rashis too. In other words, if you say Nir Mebachutz is effective, then it should be as if these budding walls of the smaller courtyard should be considered as if they're attached to the walls of the length of the larger courtyard. And then we should see as if it's Nir B'Bachutz, because the Gemara assumes at this point that the larger one is not larger than the smaller one, only very little bit, less than 3 tfachim on either side. So now you don't have a space between the entryway of the larger and chutzner than the small one, more than 3 tfachim. So you say like Lavid, say that this is like closed, because it's, let's say a tefach here and a tefach here. But this is the Gemara's next part. But it's very small. So even if the walls are here, okay. But when you have one thing, another wall from another wall, less than 3 tfachim, we view it as if it's closed. So then imagine this was colored in. So this is like a thick wall. So then it is opening up to the Chatzar Gedaila. And this should be considered as Nir Mebachutz B'Shavim Mebifnim. And the Gemara says, if you're going to say, then no. The Miflagi, that actually the walls of the smaller courtyard are distant from the walls of the larger courtyard. Tuva, much more than 3 tfachim. Because the larger courtyard was much bigger than the smaller one, and therefore you can't say Lavid. Says the Gemara, you can't say that. Because Batani Ravada Baravim Kamed Rav Chanina, he taught that Ketan Be'eser, he explained this halacha of that Mishnah later on Tzadi Beis. The smaller courtyard is 10 amas. Kedela Ba'achas Esher, and the larger one is only 11 amas. Oh, so wait a second. That means the larger one is only bigger by an amma. So if you take 3 tfachim on this side and 3 tfachim on this side, so that means to say with the thickness of the walls of the smaller one is diminishing the 3 tfachim of each side, then you have less than 3 tfachim, then you have Lavid again. You're back to the question. So then why don't you say, if you hold the Nir Mebachutz V'Shavim Mebifnim, it's going to be considered valid, so then why is the Chatzar Ketana not valid? It should be valid because of Nir Mebachutz. And even if you say the walls are coming out, who cares? Say Lavid. It's within 3 tfachim. We should view it as if it's one big wall, and if it's opening up into the Chatzar Gedaila. Not Ravina, as we have the words over here, the Muflagid Mikaisel Zeh B'Shnayim. No, it's actually not centered. The walls are from one end going to be 2 tfachim, Mikaisel Zeh B'Dalid. But from this wall, it's going to be 4 tfachim. In other words, because it was not precise, the smaller one opening up to the larger one. Rather, it was drawn to one side, 2 tfachim. So you have in this amma 2 tfachim on one side, 4 tfachim on the other side, and additionally, the walls of the small one are very thin. So that means to say you have from one side a little bit more than 3 tfachim. So even though let's say you have 4 tfachim over here, and let's say this is the wall taking up a little bit of space, but they're very thin walls, you can have let's say around 3.5 tfachim. Oh, it's already more than 3 tfachim. You can't say love. But then the Gemara says, okay, but Balim Lavin Meruch Achas, but Tishtri. But say love it from one side should be permitted. Because that means to say you have one side over here that is near B'Bachutz. So then the small one should be permitted because you're going to make this pirtza, although it's breached, you're going to make it from a pirtza into a Pesach because it's only 10 amas. It's within 10 amas, so it's a Pesach. If it's not totally breached. If it's totally breached, it could be 5 amas. Doesn't mean it's totally breached. But it's not totally breached. Why not? It's a Pesach. How so? Because you have a valid lechi right over here. Because within 3 tfachim, and therefore we view this as if it's a Pesach. Which the Gemara says, no Rabbi. It's going like Rabbi. That he says be'inan shnei pasim. We need to have 2 boards, that 2 remnants for a courtyard of 10 amas that is totally breached, and each word here is precise, that you need to have then 2 boards. It's kind of like Linda Brisa. Chatzin niteres and pasachas. The Tanna Kama holds that a courtyard is permitted with 1 board. In other words, if it's breached to Rishus Harabim, and you have at least 1 board, it's going to be permitted. Now, but if let's say, we're talking about, but that the breached area is not more than 10 amas, because it would be more than 10 amas, it wouldn't be helping any mechitza with a chatzah, because we don't even have a Pesach that's more than 10 amas. But as long as less than 10 amas, it's totally breached. As long as you have a 1 board, so then yes, according to the Tanna Kama, this would be okay. But Rabbi Shloimy says b'shnei pasim, you need to have 2 boards, and here you don't have 2 boards because here it's too far, and therefore we don't view this as part of that wall, and therefore we cannot consider this as part of the chatzah gitan, and therefore the chatzah gitan is going to be us. So in other words, we said 3 requirements to answer the question on your b'chiyah. We had a question that says, why is this Ketana going to be Aser according to B'chiyah? He permits if it's near Mebachuz. So he said, first of all, because the walls are coming out into the Gedalah. Second of all, it's not centered. And third of all, it's because we're going like Rabbi, who holds that you need to have 2 pasim, it's not enough with just 1. Some of this we discussed in today's Daf in Eruvin Daf test was, we had a question on Rava from the previous Daf, that he said that you need to have a kaira on top of the mali and not in front of it. The question was, we had a brisa that said if the kaira was meshucha, that was case number 1, or tluya. Meshucha means drawn away, or tluya means suspended. So we have machlekes if that's going to be an invalidation of 3 tefachim or 4 tefachim. That's depending on the Rabbanan regarding love. But if it's less than 3 tefachim, then we said you don't have to bring another kaira. Now, what are these 2 cases? Isn't Meshucha Tomat on the outside? It's drawn away from the Mavi. And Tluya means suspended because it doesn't reach the walls on the inside. So you see that Mibachutz is going to be Kasher, not like Rava. That's what the Gemara no. Actually, both cases are talking about on the inside because it has to be in the inner part of the Mavi, on top. But Meshucha means from one side, and Tluya means from 2 sides. And the Chiddush is that we're going to say 2 times the concept of love. That was one answer. Or it's actually all 1 case. And the 1 case is Meshucha that is Tluya. What's that? Because you see the Sekumis we're talking about, that we had the walls of the Mavai, and then the Kaira was on these poles that were both saying 2 concepts. You say Lavet and you say Chavet. And that was the Chiddush of Meshucha B'Tluya, but no one says anything about being outside the walls, like Rabbi said, never gone Rabbi. Then the Brisa was taught in front of Rabbi Yochanan, which said that both by the ear of the lechi and beneath the crossbeam, it's qualified like a carmelist, and that in other words that you're not allowed to be metaltal over there. It's forbidden to carry over there. So that Rabbi Yochanan said to him, go out and teach it outside. It's not true. Now we had a machlekes regarding how to qualify this. Rabbi Yochanan says you're allowed to carry. Was it on both cases? When he's disagreeing with the Bride says both are not okay. Now what did he say over there? Obviously it means that 1, but is it both? Abai says it's logical that when he permitted was only tachas hakar. But not being l'chaim, like we said in the previous time, by the lechi, it's going to be us. Rava says no, even by the lechi, Rabbi Yochanan says it's going to be permitted. And he says, I'll prove it to you. Because Rabbi Yochanan said that if you have an area that's not dalad dalad, which essentially is like a lechi, which is like the area of the lechi, it's batal to both the Rishus HaYachid and to the Rishus HaRab, which means to say you're allowed to carry over there. So that's essentially like the lechi is also right there between the Rishus HaYachid and the Rishus HaRab, and since it's like a makam tur, it's not dalad dalad, so you could carry over there. Which Abai says, no, there it has a height of 3 tefachim, which is recognizable. Here it's not, it's just part of the floor, and it's bein alechi, it looks like a Rishus HaRab, there it's going to be us. So it's no raya from over there. Abai says, and where do I know it from? So Abai said that because of a different halacha. Halacha said that Teicha Pesach, in the doorway itself, you need another lechi to permit it. Even though it doesn't have, and we taught, and another teaching had said, and even though it's not dalal dal. So you see that the lechi is not permitted to carry over there. Which Rava said, he says no. Rava had an interesting answer. He says that halach is where it's open up to a karmelis. And there you find matzah minas minoi. The Teicha Pesach is really the min of a karmelis. It finds the karmelis, and therefore it gets reawakened, and there it's going to be asr. Yeah, and whereas if it's open to the Rosh Hashanah, actually would be permitted, because that's a makom matur, and it's not going to be reawakened to become strengthened, like in the laws of bittul, when you have isser, that becomes asr, because it connects with another thing that's asr. But then the Gemara continued with a similar answer that Rava has, when there was a question that they had on Rava from a different teaching of Rabbi Yochanan. How could you say Bein L'Chayim is going to be mutter? But Rabbi Shloimy himself said the following interesting case. You have a mavoi that has many different lechis going along the length. So you have, that's the length of the mavoi, and you have all these lechis. So he said it was left on 4 tefachim, one from the other. So he said, now we're coming to the machlek Shmuel on Rabban. Shmuel holds that within 4 tefachim, you do say love, but according to Rabban, you don't say. Now, so that's a Ravuna. Obviously, the concept is like this. Rabbi Shmuel says that you say lavud, so that means say you could use up until only the inner part of the innermost lechi, because you can't use bein l'chayim. Rabban, you could use up until the inner part of the outer lechi, and that's where the machlekes would be, because you view it as one lechi, and so you can't use it, and therefore it would be on the innermost, like Rabbi Shmuel, or the outer one. But bein l'chayim, it seems like according to everyone's gonna be usher, because if the whole bein l'chayim is mutter, then what's the machlek Shmuel and Rabban? So you might have two approaches to reject the question of Rav. The first answer was Rav himself, like he said in the previous question. Yeah, we're talking about, you're right, usually Bein L'Chayim is going to be mutter. Here it's also because it's open up to the Carmelists. Whereas, yeah, open to Rosh Hashanah, it actually would be permitted. Because Matzah Min is Mina B'neir. Rav Ashi says, actually the case is one more variable. Yeah, it's a bunch of lechis, less than 4 tefachim from each other, but it's along a length of Dalet Amos. So that's the machlekes. Shmuel that he says lavud, so then it's a mavoi, because the area of 4 Amos. That's why you need another lechi. Whereas the contrabandant, they don't consider this connected. Therefore, it's not a mavoi. Therefore, you could go ahead and carry, even bein l'chayim of the first lechi. Now, but then the Gemara had a question. It says, wait a second. Why don't we say that it is a valid lechi? Because near mibachutz. Here it's on the outside. Because like Rashi explained that the lechi, the outermost lechi sticks out a limit to Rosh Hashanah. So it's near mibachutz. Who cares that Shabbat Mefnim is like a wall on the inside? The Gemara says no. According to Rabbi he actually holds that's not qualified as a lechi. And therefore, according to his interpretation, that's how he was able to understand that's going to be invalid. Which that brought us to the machlekes regarding with these cases of, let's say you could see the lechi from the inside, but not from the outside. Shavim mibachutz. It looks like flush with the wall. So he said, okay, everyone agrees that's going to be a valid lechi. Let's say you see from the outside, but not from the inside. So that's where the machlekes if that's going to be considered as a valid lechi or not. The Gemara says, it's his time, let's prove that Reb Chia is the one who holds that it is qualified as a lechi, because he taught a brisa that said if the wall has an indentation, it gets indented. Now, he said it doesn't make a difference if it's from the inside or the outside, which either way it's going to be that you see it from the inside or you see it from the outside. And the point is that you see that near Mibachutz or near Mibafnim, he brings a brisa, so therefore it's going to be valid. Where, although Rabbi Yochanan also knew the brisa, but he didn't teach it. And therefore, from that he taught it, obviously that he holds of it, and therefore he's the opinion that holds, and even near Mibachutz is going to be okay. And although, how could you say this halacha that it's qualified like a lechi, which Rabbah also learned, like Rabbi Chia says like a lechi, but we learned in the Mishnah later on, the Tzadi Beis, that says that a chatzah getan is nibitz l'gedela. The gedela is muteris and the getan is going to be aser. Wait, why is the getan aser? What do you mean? It's near b'machutz. We see the gedela as a pesach. It's considered as a pesach. So why are we saying that the getan is aser? In the outside it's valid, so why is it aser on the inside? So we had 3 qualifications for the answer why it's not the begotten Reb Chia and Rabbah. First of all, we're talking about that the walls of the small one, they go into the large one. So if this is the picture, and this is the Chatzah Gedayla, and this is the Chatzah Ketana, the walls go in. Additionally, so why did you say Lavid? Because although it's only an amma bigger, but it's 2 tefachim on one side and it's 4 tefachim on the other side, like we said, it's not precise in the middle. So although it's only an amma bigger, but it will have 4 tefachim on one side. And additionally, says, okay, but why isn't enough with one on the outside, like red? Why isn't enough with on one side just to say love it? That you'll say that you will have a lechi. This one of that's the 2 tefachim. Like Rebbe holds that you need to have 2 pasim, and which is specifically of a chatzah that nivitz b'milui, which is the small one, which totally breach. You would have to have 2 boards to permit it to make it into Pesach, and you only have 1 board because one side is 2 tefachim, the other side is 4 tefachim. Thank you to any temple hosting us.